Hi everybody, it's Geordie from Geordie's Cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am creating this garden-inspired Lawn Fawn card using lots of Lawn Fawn products. Now just a heads up, this is a very long video with lots of colouring in it, so please feel free to skip over the colouring if that's not your thing. So a quick look at the products I used today. I used this Lawn Fawn Stitched Garden Border die. I was initially going to use this picket fence border die, but I didn't use it in the end. I did use the Bug Deal stamp set. I also used the Fairy Friends stamp set for all those little flowers, and the Gleeful Garden stamp set. Now these two have been well loved. I've used them a lot. I love those stamp sets. I was going to use the butterflies from Butterfly Kisses, but I didn't in the end. I did use the little ladybugs from Hey Lady and the sign from Open Me. I was going to use this flower from the Garden Before and After stamp set, but in the end I just used it for the sentiments. This is the large slimline with sliders die. I used the smallest die from that. And initially I was going to use this Scalloped Slimline with hearts, but I ended up using the smaller one, the portrait version instead. So off camera I die cut my pieces. So the white piece comes from the Slimline with sliders die, and the Garden Borders die I did some partial die cutting so that I could extend it and make it big enough to fit on my slimline scene. I've masked off the stitched border of my piece of paper, and I'm going in with some broken china and some shaded lilac Distress Oxide inks. Now in the end you don't really end up seeing too much of the shaded lilac, but I kind of liked having a slightly purplish colour to it. As I say, you don't really see a great deal, but you know what, it was fun to make anyway. So I just went back and forth with my Distress Oxides until I was happy with the blend and the coverage. I did pull in my little garden border to see how low down I would need to go, and kind of kept at it until I was happy with everything. So once I was happy with it, I took the broken china distress ink and smooshed a bit down onto my mat, sprayed it with a little bit of water, and then picked some up with my paintbrush and tapped it all over to create some splatters. Initially, I was just going to use this broken china colour, but I decided that I wanted some of the purple splatters in there as well. So I did go in with my shaded lilac and do that as well. Of course it needed some white in there too, so I took this white acrylic paint and just squirted a blob onto my craft mat there, sprayed it again with a little bit of water, and then splattered it on with my paintbrush, and then that was my background panel completed. So onto the garden border die, which I had cut using Neenah Desert Storm cardstock, so it's kind of a craft colour. And I just used Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink on the top edge to create some contrast, and then added my splatters with some both Vintage Photo and some white acrylic paint. I should say here that I did mask off the edges where the stitch detail was, because I also cut this from the Slimline Stitched Border die. In the end, I cut those pieces off. I wanted the border to be white rather than brown, so I just cut those pieces off. Off camera, I went ahead and stamped a whole load of images, and now it's onto the colouring. So for my daisies, I'm using B00, just to add a tiny bit of shading to them and then blending out with the Colourless Blender. I wanted them to look white, but I also just wanted them to have a little bit of something. Onto my yellows, which I use for the daisy center. I used YR23, YR21 and YR20 for those. I'm only showing one of each image because I coloured all the images that are the same in exactly the same way. And as I say, there's a lot of colouring in here. For the stem, I used YG09, YG07 and YG05. For my little bluebells, I used BV02 and BV04, and I tried to kind of create a bit of a flicking motion at the top, and I didn't want to blend that out too much. I wanted it to have a little bit of texture to make it look a bit more flower-like, so that was the idea behind it. I did end up going back in with a second coat of the BV04 just to make that a little bit more pronounced, and then I flicked it out again with the BV02, so a couple of coats on each one, but I like the way this kind of gives it a bit of texture. So onto the leaves and the stem, I used G21, G24 and G28. Started out with my G28 and laid in my shadow. This is a really nice dark green colour. And then I blended out with my G24 and finished off with my G21. For my little tulip, I used V05 and V04, and I did off camera end up going back in with V09 and just to add a little bit more contrast. These two colours are quite similar, so you don't get a huge amount of depth. And then the V09 is quite a lot darker, but in the end I kind of liked the look of the V09 on there as well. And as I said, just laid in a tiny bit of colour off camera towards the bottom of the tulip with that one. Once I was happy with the top of the tulip, I went in with my greens for the stem, and I used G17, G14 and G12 for that. So onto the grass, I used G17, G14 and G12, and I really like the contrast that this colour combination gives. So just again laid in my darkest shade, blended out with my medium and then my lightest. So I was inspired to make this card today for the current Lawnfawnatics challenge, which is create a scene. I really like scene building cards, and I kind of debated for a while about what kind of scene to create. But I guess because it's spring, I decided to go for a garden theme. And I'm really happy I did, because I'm happy with how it turned out. So I did do a few coats on this grass. It was a slightly larger image and I really wanted my blending to be nice and smooth and seamless on this one. Then on to my little toadstools, and I used R59, R27, R24 and R22. I really like this dark deep red to add a little bit of shading to the red colours, and I just think it really helps the other colours to kind of pop. So that's why I went in with such a dark deep red. I just think it helps create a really nice shadow. So just the same as always, darkest and then blending out towards my lightest. And again, I did do this a couple of times just to get a really nice even blend. For the stalk of my toadstool and the spots, I used E42, E41 and E40. And again, just created some shadow with my darkest and then blended out to lightest. For my little sign, I wanted it to look like wood, so I used E47, E44, E43 and E42. And I kind of went in and did a kind of an outline and then kind of just swept the marker across quite messily, just because I wanted it to give it some texture and make it look a bit like a wooden textured sign. That was the idea I was going for. I'm not sure it worked, but I think it turned out quite nicely actually. I only did one coat because I didn't want to blend everything in too much. I wanted to keep those kind of flick lines and make it look quite textured. And then I just kind of shaded around the post of it as well. So once the sign and all the foliage had been done, it was onto my little critters, and I used E37 and E35 for the little worms, and just very basic colouring for these guys because they're all very, very small. I used those same two shades for the kind of base, the slug part of my little snail, and then used the lighter E30 markers for his shell, so E33 and E31. For my little ladybirds, I used R59, R27 and R24, which are the same red shades that I used for my toadstool. I just got rid of the R22. And then for the little black parts of them, the little heads and the bit of body you can see underneath the wings, I used N8, N6 and N4. For the heads, I just used the two N6 and N4 shades, and I used the N8 just on the body part that you can see. For my hummingbirds, I used Y00, BV000, BV01 and BV02, and I just wanted to have a little bit of that yellow shade on the tummy area, and then I used the kind of purple shades on the rest of him. I did colour in both these, but I only ended up using one of them. So these little hummingbirds come from the Gleeful Garden set, which is an absolutely adorable set. It is quite a lot older than some of the more recent ones. I'm not sure when it came out. I've had it for a long time, and it's one of those ones that I pull out every now and then and kind of just fall in love with it all over again. I love these little hummingbird images, and the great thing about them is that you can colour them in so many different colours and shades. Obviously I'm doing mine in kind of purple colours today, but they look great in blues and greens and all sorts. For the little beak, I went in with YR21 and YR20, and then it was on to my little woodlouse, slater, not sure, whatever you want to call him. I used N6, N4 and N2 for him. For my little butterflies, I used E33 and E31 for their main body parts, And then I did their wings in a couple of different shades. I'd stamped out 3 butterflies initially, but I only used 2 of them. So for one colour combination, I used yellows. I used Y00 and Y02. And the other one I did in some kind of pinky colours. I used the V05, V04, and then I did add in the V09. So next up were my little crickets, and I used YG09, YG07 and YG05. I wanted these to be nice kind of bright yellowish green colours to make them kind of stand out and look a little bit like the crickets that you see around in the grass outside. After I'd finished them, it was on to my little caterpillar, and I used BG72 and BG75. Again, these images are very small, so I'm just doing some very basic shading and colouring with these. So that was pretty much all my colouring done. I did just add some R20 to the little cheeks of all of my little critters. And then, as always, I went in with my white Jelly Roll Sakura pen and added some highlight details to everything, which you will see here in a second. And just like the way this makes everything kind of pop and look a little bit more three-dimensional, a little bit kind of whimsical, perhaps cartoonish, I'm not sure what the word is, but I like the way this looks. So I always tend to use some white Jelly Roll pen on my coloured images. So once all the colouring was done, there was a serious amount of fussy cutting to do. I don't have coordinating dies for any of these sets, so I did have to get my scissors out and cut around everything, which did take a long time, but generally I don't mind. I actually just sit down with a podcast and cut while I'm listening to a podcast, which is quite relaxing and quite a nice way to spend your time. So once everything was fussy cut out, it was just time to assemble everything together. So what I did was I kind of laid out everything in order of where I wanted them to go. So I started out with all my plants and flowers, and you'll see in this die there's some little kind of little hills, little bumps of dirt that have little kind of die cut openings in them, so you can slot everything inside. So I just kind of laid everything out according to where I wanted them to sit, and then popped them into those little slots, and then just used some liquid glue at the back to hold them all down. This obviously took a while because there's a lot of images, but I really liked just kind of playing around and trying things out. I did change a few things around, like this where I put the second tulip. I decided that I wanted to move it over, so I kind of just fiddled around with things a little bit, but just kind of layered everything up. I wanted it to look nice and full, and I think I achieved that in the end. There's so many images. I did have a few that I kept and kind of popped behind the dirt mound at the end. But on the whole, I just kind of played around and popped everything where I liked the look of it. So this was a little bit fiddly. It was just trying to get everything in where I wanted it to go and kind of making sure everything was lined up where I needed it to be. But in the end, I got everything, I think, looking quite good, and I was quite happy with the finished result. My liquid glue did, get a bit messy, but it's only on the back of the cardstock, so you can't really notice it. And I think it turned out really nice. So just adding the last little bits in, I did end up using all of the flowers that I had coloured. I didn't use all of the little insects and things that I coloured. The only thing I didn't use, I had initially stamped out some of the leaves from the Bug Deal stamp set and the little stick, and I had intended to kind of have them coming in from the side, but realised pretty quickly that I really wasn't going to have the room for that, so I just left them out of it, and I didn't show the colouring for those because I didn't actually use them on the card. I might be able to use them for another card another time, so I've just kept them aside for another day. So once all of those pieces were stuck down, as I say, I did have a couple of bits left over that I ended up just sticking directly to the back of this little stitched garden border. And then obviously the sign, which I really wanted to make sure was kind of propped up in there in a prominent place, because that's my sentiment basically for this card. So just making sure that everything was nicely stuck down with my liquid glue. And I decided to put my little sign in there behind these little grasses, just to make sure that the grasses are kind of just overlapping it just slightly. Obviously not covering the sentiment because I want you to be able to read the sentiment, but I just think it kind of adds a bit of a whimsical look to it. So now I'm just placing it on, I'm not sticking it down yet, just placing it onto the base, and then I'm taking all my little critters out and I'm going to play around with where they're going to go. So just kind of getting them all out and deciding where they're going to fit onto my card. Now you'll probably notice that I am adhering some of these images so that they're actually hanging off the edge of the base of the card. That's okay, because I am going to have a bit of a border around it anyway, and also just like the way that it looks like everything's kind of extending off the scene a little bit. It kind of makes it look like it carries on. And here's where I pulled in that picket fence, but I decided that really just wasn't going to work. There wasn't enough room, and I wanted to put all my little critters down underneath. So I just got rid of that, or not got rid of it. I've just put it aside, and I might be able to use it on another card another time. So now I'm just kind of putting all my little bugs in and seeing where they're going to go. I wanted to have a few kind of looking like they were creeping out of the foliage. So I tried to tuck in some of them behind a few little of the elements in there, and just played around with that until I had it all looking the way I wanted it. And once I was happy, again, I just took my liquid glue and popped everything down into place. So initially I wasn't sure about that second little cricket that's at the front there, so I didn't glue him down immediately. I just popped everything else down where I wanted it and kind of went back to him at the end, decided that I did like him and I was going to keep him in there, so I added some glue to him as well. But you can see I'm just trying to tuck things in into the actual kind kind of seen as well as have them in the foreground at the front. Just kind of wanted it to make it look like a little garden that you might find anywhere. Perhaps not here in the UAE where it's a bit too hot for most of these little critters and flowers, but maybe a garden somewhere where you live. So once everything was stuck down, I went and added a whole bunch of foam tape to the back of this, and then just laid it down on top of my ink blended panel, trying to get it nice and lined up so that I had that little white border all the way around. Once I'd done that, I took some liquid glue and I just stuck down all the other little images that hadn't been glued down. So all the little flowers that were sticking up, I just added a little bit of glue behind them and stuck them down to the base. When I was happy that everything was stuck down securely, I took this Scalloped Slimline with Hearts landscape. Initially I was going to go with the portrait, but I decided that the landscape looked better, and I die cut it from some Lawn Fawn Rainforest cardstock. Now, it took me a long time to decide what colour cardstock to use for this. I went through a lot of different options, but I decided I liked the Rainforest, how it made everything kind of pop. So just added some liquid glue to the back of my ink blended panel and then adhered that down, hopefully nice and evenly, onto my little scalloped panel. And once that was done, I went ahead and created a bit of a custom card base. It was about 7 and I want to say 14/16 or 7 7/8 by 2 and 6/8. I'm really sorry, my imperial measurements are really bad. I use metric most of the time, except when it comes to card making. Hopefully you could see there on the ruler what the measurement was. It's basically just a card panel that's going to fit behind that scalloped piece that I'd cut with the Lawn Fawn die. And I'm using another sentiment from the Garden Before and Afters, and this little daisy from the Fairy Friends, and stamping that out inside using my Versafine Onyx black ink. Sometimes I like to do a little sentiment inside the card. So now I'm just taking my panel and using liquid glue on the back. I'm going to attach it to my card. I did want to kind of put my card to the panel because the panel is slightly bigger than the card. I had to think a little minute to figure out which way it was going to go around, make sure I had everything around the right way, and then just adhered that down. And you can see there's a little border all the way around. And that's it, card finished. I really hope you enjoyed this one today. I really enjoyed making it. Thank you for joining me. Please do give it a thumbs up if you did like it. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to see you back. And please feel free to comment. I'd love to hear what you thought. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Bye.